All right.
Okay.
Jai Radha Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnana-Jana-Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Dadati Swabdantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama. So thank you all for attending. I'm very humbled by that too kind introduction. And also, you all have been experiencing a very high class of speakers. Visiting speakers have been coming to this Zoom for so long. So I pray that you'll, out of your affection for me, you'll be so kind as to tolerate my shortcomings, and hopefully since I'll be able to purify myself by repeating the words of Shastra, and be able to, will hopefully have a good instruction for myself first of all, and then hopefully by sharing with all of you, then we can all benefit. So let me share my screen. Are we seeing it? Okay. Yes. All right, so as Sadhu Chaitanya Prabhu mentioned, our topic is how we can make our mind our friend. So the task is to make friends with our mind, and probably when you all heard the topic, many of us were immediately reminded of these famous verses from Bhagavad Gita. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So this is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, texts 5 through 6. And the very first striking thing in these verses is that we are considering our mind not to be ourself to be someone different from our mind. And this itself is actually very helpful for us, that if we think a thought, we don't have to be that thought. If there's something going on in our mind, we don't have to identify with that. We are not our minds. And it is very difficult to realize completely. It's, even after so many years, it's difficult even for me. Yet even just having this idea in the first place can be very helpful. And especially if we know people who are having some troubles, we can see the big difference that it makes just to have this concept that our mind is not necessarily the same as ourself, and that our mind is not necessarily our friend. So in other words, we need to make our mind our friend. We have to do something to make our friends with our mind. On the other hand, so we said this is our task, to make friends with our mind, but then there's some other verses that may make us question this. So Srila Shukadev Goswami said to Parikshit Maharaj, after capturing animals, a cunning hunter does not put faith in them, for they might run away. Similarly, those who are advanced in spiritual life do not put faith in the mind. Indeed, they always remain vigilant and watch the mind's action. All the learned scholars have given their opinion. The mind is by nature very restless, and one should not make friends with it. If we place full confidence in the mind, it may cheat us at any moment. So this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. So this is where Srila Shukadev Goswami is talking about Rishabhdev. There's a few chapters about Rishabhdev there. So here it says one should not make friends with it. So this at first may seem a little puzzling. So Shri Krishna said that the mind can become our greatest friend, and then here Srila Shukadev Goswami is saying that one should not make friends with it. So these are actually, there's a resolution to this puzzle that also comes from the Bhagavad Gita, which is given in Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, verse 42. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. So, can you see my pointer if I'm pointing? All right, so here, okay, so here's dull matter. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is even higher than the intelligence. So in the sense that when Krishna said that we should make friends with our mind, the mind is still to remain a subordinate, even after our friend. So when Shukadev Goswami is saying that we can't make friends with our mind, he's saying that we can't treat the mind like an equal. So even if we think at some point that, okay, my mind is more or less controlled, the mind is always restless and it can always escape. So it can't be our friend in the same sense as our peers, but it can be our friend in the sense that it is helping us. So just like it is said that a child from until the age of 5 is to be treated with affection, and then from the age of 5 to 16, the child is disciplined, and then at the age of 16, one's child becomes one's friend. But at the same time, one's child is still one's child, even though the child is one's friend. So similarly, the mind, even if we gain some measure of control over it, we're still to keep vigilant. So this is the resolution of this puzzle. So now I'll ask a question, and maybe people can write in the chat what they think is the answer to this question. Which animal is more dangerous? So we have a wolf and a cow. And let me see if I can see the chat.
It depends.
Yeah, so in order to keep sharing the screen, maybe it's better if someone else looks at the chat. So maybe Naveen Krishna Prabhu, you can see if anybody writes anything in the chat.
Okay, I can check. So far, nobody typed yet. Or they can say it also.
Sriram typed wolf.
Well, I think you know that it's difficult because the most deadliest animal in America is a deer. Deer kill more people in America than any other animal. So I'm not counting out the cow yet. Let's just say that.
So
Yes,
Premchandra
that's
Prabhu
true.
is asking, it is a wild wolf or like tamed wolf?
A wild wolf.
That's actually a good question because it's not that big.
I'll say wolf.
Okay, we have one vote for wolf.
Is any vote for it depends?
Sriram, he said wolf.
One for wolf, two for wolf, and one for it depends. All right, I guess people are shy. So I'll go to the next slide. So I would say that Naveen Krishna Prabhu has come closest to the correct answer. So it depends on how you measure it. And so what I have on this slide is one measure. And Hari was pretty close with looking at how many people are killed each year. So I had also found that when I found these statistics. So in over a century, wolves in the United States have attacked 6 people unprovoked and then 21 people after being fed by humans. So that's an average of around 1 person every 4 to 5 years. Whereas cows kill about 22 people every year. So now, if you think of these animals, then you think automatically that a wolf is a carnivore, it's a wild animal, it's a dangerous animal. So why is this? Well, the thing is that we don't encounter wolves very often. Humans are not in touch with wolves, whereas humans are in touch with cows much more often. And cows, they're large and they can kick, they have horns, they can injure one even accidentally. So one's mind, which Shukadev Goswami can compare to an animal, this is an animal that we're in contact with 24/7, 100% of the time. So this is one reason why he's highlighting that we have to be vigilant. And so even if we and by the way, that was an interesting question about whether it's a wild wolf or a tamed wolf. A tamed wolf is a dog, and dogs kill way more people than wolves, also in the United States. And of course, that's because many more people have dogs. So even once, if the cow is very docile and sweet, we're not going to keep the fence open, keep the gate open, because the cow will run away. That's exactly what the cows will do, even no matter how much they're affectionate to one particular person or they're sweet and docile to people in general, they're just going to wander out the gate. So it's helpful to think of the mind as a cow. The mind is the chief sense. Shri Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 7, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. And so the senses are also called go, and the cows are also called go. And then Srila Prabhupada says in many places, and here's one place, he is Govinda because he is the pleasure of the cows and the senses. So here we have a beautiful picture of Krishna with some cows, Govinda, he's the herder of the cows. So how can we make friends with our mind? What is a practical, this is meant to be a practical application. So we get a hint from the Nectar of Instruction, the first verse, which says, "A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world." So we notice that we can divide these 6 things into 2 parts. The first 3 are mental, more or less, and the last 3 are physical actions. And of these, so you would think, okay, so if the first 3 have to do with our mind, then we would think that the mind comes first. But in fact, what came first was speech. And in fact, we can train our mind through first training our speech, because our speech is less frequent, and we generally have more control over our speech already. So it's actually a good beginning place to train our mind. So how do we train our speech? Sri Krishna has given us the discipline of speech in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17, verse 15. So I'll read this verse and the purport. It's a very short purport. Anudveda karam vakyam satyam priya hitam chayat swadhyaya abhyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchite. Austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literature. Purport: one should not speak in such a way as to agitate the minds of others. Of course, when a teacher speaks, he can speak the truth for the instructions of his students. But such a teacher should not speak to those who are not his students if he will agitate their minds. This is penance as far as talking is concerned. Besides that, one should not talk nonsense. The process of speaking in spiritual circles is to say something upheld by the scriptures. One should at once quote from scriptural authority to back up what he is saying. At the same time, such talk should be very pleasurable to the ear. By such discussions, one may derive the highest benefit and elevate human society. There is a limitless stock of Vedic literature, and one should study this. This is called penance of speech. So in particular, there were 3, some people have called them 3 gates of speech that are described in this verse, that the speech should be truthful, first of all. It should be pleasing, priya hitam. So priya is dear, so it's both pleasing and dear, and it should be beneficial. And then finally, Srila Prabhupada puts what is also put first in this verse, that it should be not agitating to the mind. So we can first start by learning how to do this in our speech to others. And when I first started practicing this, I found that, okay, well, it was maybe easy to get 2 out of 3, but to get all 3 of these, go through all 3 of these gates at the same time, it could be challenging. So it's truthful, pleasing, and beneficial. So I was often in a quandary. And so it takes practice. And one practice that I found helpful was to rewrite the things that I said to try to make them, to state this get the same point, and to try to make them have all 3 of these qualities, as well as being based on Shastra. So one might rewrite something if one thinks one is going to say something to someone and it seems difficult. One can rewrite ahead of time, or if something came out on the spur of the moment, and so this has certainly happened to me, that if I felt that I wish I had said that better, I can try to remember what I said, and I can try to rewrite it. Well, how could I have made the same point that I wanted to make in a way that would satisfy all of these qualities? So if we practice this speech, then over time we'll gradually it'll gradually become easier to make this kind of speech and to phrase things in such a way that, and we'll see in how others react, that this will actually, it's actually not just, it is a devotional practice. It is part of the practice of austerity, which Sri Krishna says should never be given up. So it can be part of trying to please Krishna, but we will see that it will also be more effective. Our speech will become more effective in interacting with others. So this caveat that Srila Prabhupada put in the purport, that of course when a teacher speaks, he can speak the truth for the instruction of his students, but such a teacher should not speak to those who are not his students if he will agitate their minds. So in other places, Srila Prabhupada has said that one must speak the truth even if it is unpalatable. So the caveat is that one has to speak the truth in order to instruct others. And so now when we apply this to how do we speak to our own mind, we may have to speak a truth which is unpalatable. And so our mind may not always like what we tell it. However, if we are practiced in speaking, then when we speak in this way and establish this relationship through speech, and if we establish that relationship with the mind also, then we can instruct the mind. And I won't go into this here, but we have examples from Raghunath Das Goswami. He has a whole book called Manashiksha, the Splendid Instructions for the Mind. And we see that he is addressing the mind, oh brother, and is generally speaking sweetly, but firmly to his mind when instructing. So this is how we can speak to our mind. Then next is the discipline of the mind. And so this is really the central concept, but it's a little bit more abstract. So I'll briefly speak about it. And considering that the mind as a kind of an animal that we have to tame, then this is the way that we can, what will our mind be like once, and what are the elements to keep it tame? So, Manah prasada somyatvam monam atma vinigraha bhavasang shuddhi rityetat tapo manasam uchite. And satisfaction, simplicity, gravity, self-control, and purification of one's existence are the austerities of the mind. So we can take these one by one. So manaprasada is satisfaction of the mind. So something that we may have a tendency to do is to complain. And we may indulge in complaint. And sometimes there is something really to complain about. So it's and sometimes actually complaining may actually help the situation, because if we complain to the right person, or if we complain in conjunction with our friends, we may be able to seek a solution to the problem, or at least we can get some compassion for our situation, and maybe that will help us feel better. But to make complaining a tendency is not what is recommended here. What is recommended is satisfaction, that we try to be satisfied. And another word, so the word that is used here, prasada is mercy. So it's Krishna's mercy. So if we try to remember Krishna's mercy, then that will help us to be satisfied. And then we will be grateful for whatever is good about our situation. And many people have already found that gratitude is very helpful for the mind. And so sometimes people have a practice of making a gratitude journal, of trying to make a point every day of writing down what they're grateful for. They sometimes have a number of things, like 3 things that they're grateful for. And so often what is good about our situation we take for granted. And so we may tend to see the problems. So we may have to go out of our way and make a point in order to remain grateful. And then Somyatvang, so it's translated, so in the word for word, it says being without duplicity towards others. And Srila Prabhupada has also translated that as simplicity. So this is being straightforward, and it also means mild. So the word is derived from Soma is the moon, and Somya is someone who is mild like the rays of the moon. So, and the person is simple. So it's if we think of the moonlight, then it's cool and pleasing and mild. So Uddhava, for instance, is someone who is sometimes referred to as Somya. So if we've heard about Uddhava, then we can remember a very mild and gentle person. And certainly the crookedness and calculatingness, these are the opposite of simplicity. So trying to put up a false front is also not helpful for our mind, and it's also actually very draining and not useful. So that's another aspect. So being ourselves and being simple and mild. Monam is the discipline of speech, and it's very interesting that monam is it's often translated as silence, but here it's not. It didn't occur in the discipline of speech, and in fact, as devotees, we are not silent. We're chanting and we're speaking about Krishna and reciting the Vedic literature, but we're trying to discipline our mental speech. So that's supporting that disciplining our mental speech is part of the discipline of the mind. Then Atma Vinigraha is controlling the mind. So this is what we're trying to do in the first place. So I'll have more to say about that in the rest of this talk. Bhava Sangshuddhi is purification of one's nature. So all austerities are purifying one's nature. The discipline of the body also purifies one's nature. So that's a verse that I won't go through today, but that was chapter 17, verse 14, so you can look it up. And also trying to purify that our environment, the parts that we can control, like for instance, our home, and our association, our surroundings, all of this helps us to purify our nature. So now I'll take a brief detour through 4 keys to cultivating Krishna consciousness in children. So this comes from a talk that Her Grace Rukmini Devi Dasi gave on February 2nd, 2013, which you can find online. And so I'll just briefly say, what are these 4 keys? The 4 keys are relationships of love and trust, stories, meaningful, valuable service, and positive triggers. So first, let's define what is a trigger. Trigger is some kind of sensory input that triggers or is anchored to a particular physiological and psychological state of being. So she was laying these out in terms of cultivating Krishna consciousness in children, which is beyond the scope of this talk, so I won't talk more about that. You can refer to her talk. However, these, as we already mentioned, that the mind is to be considered as a subordinate. And Sri Krishna says that we're supposed to control the mind by the means of the superior, which is its intelligence. And it's also been compared to an animal, and we're comparing it to a cow. So in that sense, how is it possible to use these keys to tame the wild animal, to tame the mind? So that's what I'll be talking about next. So the first key was relationships of love and trust. So taming our mind with trust. What are some ways that we can get our mind to trust us? Now, one might think that, okay, well, I'm always with my mind, so how can my mind not trust me? Like, there's nothing between me and my mind. We're always together. However, there are ways that we can tell our mind that we are more trustworthy. So here I'm taking I to be the intelligence with which I'm trying to control the mind, and the mind to be this animal that we're trying to tame. So one thing is to be consistent. These are all sort of similar to each other. Be consistent, keep our commitments to ourselves, and have some amount of routine. So the mind really likes routine. It's comfortable with habits. And so if we're trying to discipline the mind, then in any kind of discipline, consistency is key. So when you have a pet or a 2-year-old, people have found that if you are inconsistent, then the other entity will try to figure out how to push against these limits and find where to get around them. It's just like the animal escaping from the pen, like Shukadeva Goswami was talking about. So if we're consistent, then the limits are known, and then once the limits are consistent and known, then the animal doesn't try to keep escaping. It understands these are the limits, and it just stays within those limits. Now, keeping our commitments to ourselves, it's both fun commitments and disciplinary commitments. So in The Speed of Trust, which is a very interesting book by, I believe it's Stephen R. Covey, so it's the son of the more famous Stephen Covey. He gives an example where at some point he was setting an alarm every day, and yet he wasn't paying any attention to the alarm. He wasn't getting up. And he said that he was telling his mind each night that he would get up the following morning, and then he wasn't doing it. And then this was a commitment that he wasn't keeping. And it was becoming completely meaningless. So this is actually a kind of internal speech to say that we're going to do something. So he wasn't keeping his word to his own mind. So keeping our word is a very important part of establishing trust. And we have to establish trust within ourselves and also with others as part of the discipline of speech that we spoke before. And then also about fun. So for instance, if we make ourselves do something by saying that, okay, well, I'll do it for this amount of time, and then I'm going to take a break. And then when that time comes, it says, no, I can't take a break. No, I won't. Then eventually our mind will rebel. Like, it will say, okay, you're never going to let me take a break. So, I'm going to force it. Like it'll just carry us away. So there needs to be some regulation and some expectation that the mind can follow and trust in. So Sri Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, there is no possibility of one's becoming a yogi, O Arjun, if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much or does not sleep enough. He who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation, and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. So everything has to be in a happy medium. And also even the amount of routine has to be in a happy medium, and that may be different for different people. This is actually it varies by temperament. So some people prefer a lot of structure and some people prefer less structure. However, in general, if there's no structure, then there's basically too many decisions to make, and it's actually not good for the mind. We become subject to our own whims, and we may think that that's making us happy, but eventually we find that it's actually very draining, and it's not getting us anywhere, and it is not conducive to happiness. So the next key was taming our mind with stories. So not much to say about that. Everybody loves stories. But I wanted to note that in the purport of that verse about the discipline of the mind, Bhagavad Gita chapter 17, verse 16, Srila Prabhupada specifically says, the best course is to divert the mind to the Vedic literature, which is full of satisfying stories, as in the Puranas and the Mahabharata. One can take advantage of this knowledge and thus become purified. So this is not just for children, this is for adults, this is for everyone, that the positive occupation of the mind with the satisfying stories is the best way to occupy our mind. And it will satisfy our mind. Then the third key was taming our mind through meaningful, valuable service. And what does that mean? So here's a quote from a letter from Srila Prabhupada written on January 28th, 1973. Everyone has got some propensity. The art of preaching is to engage that propensity in the service of Krishna. Whatever we have got, our mind, our intelligence, our possessions, our time, our energies, let them all be used in Krishna's service. So we need to first know what are our mind's propensities. Each of us has a different psychophysical nature, and we have different capacities. So then we need to engage in service that uses them. And unused capacities cause distress. So this is from the Johnson O'Connor Research Foundation, which I believe it's around a century old, that has been researching human capacities. And often people have a capacity that is not used in their occupation, and it actually causes some kind of mental friction. And generally they say an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So whatever is not engaged properly, it either makes us unhappy or we somehow engage it improperly. And Srila Prabhupada has also said in some places that it leads to envy, which is of course a very dangerous thing. And the Nectar of Devotion, chapter 8, also tells us that we should worship Krishna with whatever we have, by all of our means. And so that means that we should engage all of our capacities. And if we gradually take on more responsibility in that service that is according to our propensities and capacities, then that will engage our mind in this meaningful service. And when our mind is properly engaged, then it has less time to be improperly engaged. And often the things that are annoying or dangerous when misused, they actually become very wonderful when they're used properly. So then, we will also be happy in doing that service, and so that helps to make our mind our friend. And finally, the fourth key was taming our mind through positive triggers. So this is a quote again from Urmila Prabhu's talk. Triggers form either from a single strong experience or repeated weak experiences. So the triggers that we have in our practice, the strong experiences are the festivals and celebrations. They give us many positive triggers, but there's also repeated weak experiences. So for instance, now in this pandemic, we're not necessarily able to go to the temple as often as we would like, and we're spending more time in our homes. So we can have sacred space dedicated to Krishna in our homes, and many of us already have some kind of an altar, and we may have had to reconfigure our homes a bit because we're doing more activities at home than we were before, but still we want to be careful to keep that space sacred. So if it's in our home, it can't be, as strict about everything as a temple. That's not practical. However, one thing that it is worth trying to take care of is take care to keep only positive triggers there. And one thing some people do, if they don't have any space that they can set aside, is that they have doors that they can close. So then at least there's a mental space that when the doors are open, then that's when the space is. So it's basically a time and space. When the doors are open, then that's when that sacred space is present. But it should be at least big enough that you can be in that sacred space. And so we take care that our experiences there have only positive triggers. And so, that includes, keeping it nice, keeping it, looking nice, smelling nice. But since we were emphasizing the discipline of speech, we'll be speaking more about that in the next few slides. And even if we don't have sacred space, most of us are chanting japa, the holy names of the Lord. And so we have a sacred time dedicated to Krishna. That is our japa time. And so ideally, we're just chanting the holy name. But at least I have experienced that my mind is wandering and saying many things, not just the holy name. If we are engaging in mental speech, we should at least have awareness that Krishna is present in his holy name. So so of course with it, when the ideal is to realize that fully and give full attention to Krishna, but we can at least be aware if we're having thoughts that Krishna is in front of us. So the same way that Krishna is in front of us in the temple, and we would be careful of our speech in the temple, then similarly, so this is an ideal. This is difficult to achieve, and I can't say that I always achieve it either. I'm telling myself, perhaps the most of any of you. But the ideal is that we if we're having any mental speech during our japa, that we have that with the awareness that Krishna is present and that we're speaking in front of Krishna. So with that, there's actual specifics about how to speak in a temple. There's many things said in the Nectar of Devotion, chapter 8, about what one should not do in a temple. And as I said, not everything is practical in a home, and even less so in when chanting the holy name. There's no hard and fast rules for chanting the holy name, and it can be chanted in any time and place and any circumstances. However, the ideal is that we can try to keep these practices. So these are practices regarding speech. So in the presence, in our sacred space, and these keep us from setting up negative triggers. So then we would have only positive triggers. So one should never speak a lie there. One should not talk very loudly there, not be raising one's voice. One should not talk with others there. So this means talking with others while not basically paying more attention to others than to the deity, just not being aware that Krishna is there, not keeping it as an ordinary place. One should not quarrel or fight there. So again, this is something that is, it may be challenging, especially in our home, but if inevitably in the course of being with other people, if there's a quarrel or fight, we should try to take it away from that place, not in that place. One should not chastise anyone there. So, and that includes ourselves. It's not a time for chastisement or a place for chastisement. One should not speak very harshly to the others there. One should not eulogize or praise anyone else there. So in Krishna's space, the person to eulogize or praise is Krishna. And we can do vandana, and we have beautiful songs. And we can also meditate when we're chanting Hare Krishna that we're praising Krishna also. One should not speak any ill names there. This goes without saying. And one should not be angry there. So, and this goes back to, we mentioned in the Nectar of Instruction verse that the three elements were to control the speech, control the mind, and control the anger. And it's interesting that controlling the anger was the third thing. It's actually the most difficult thing to control. But we can at least control it, okay, at least in this sacred space, I will not be angry. And if possible, in the sacred time when we're chanting japa, we should try not to be angry. We should try to be in the same mood as we would cultivate if Krishna were in front of us. Now, Atma Vinigraha is restraining the mind, controlling the mind. And so this is what we're trying to do in the first place. And so how can we do that? So this is one place where it's helpful to think of the mind as a cow, at least it was helpful to me, is that there is a herding stick. And so here in this picture of Govinda that I had before, we have Krishna standing with a herding stick. And here's a picture of Krishna and the cowherd boys, and some of them have herding sticks. So we may have heard that we can control our mind with a stick or a shoe. And so it's helpful to think of that, one can also control a cow with a stick or a shoe. And I actually found some videos. If someone wants, I can share them. You can ask me offline. that show how people who are training cows, they restrain them with sticks and even with shoes. So the restraint with the stick is very firm, and it's short and sharp and efficient. So you can use a stick to, so for instance, to pick up the foot of the cow and place it, or to block the foot of the cow with your shoe. And you can even, nudge the foot of the cow with your shoes. And also the cow is being held with the halter. So this is very picturesque with the word Atma Vinigraha. Graha is grabbing. It's actually cognate to the English word grabbing. So you're grabbing. So this is something that happens, for instance, in japa. This is that our mind wanders. At least my mind wanders, definitely. And so as many times as the mind wanders away, we have to bring back to attention that, we're supposed to be attending to Shri Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada has given positive recommendations. For instance, that we can have a picture of Krishna. He said that we can meditate, that we're making a beautiful throne for Krishna. One person wrote to him that, is it offensive to think of Krishna's pastime while chanting? And Srila Prabhupada wrote back, it is not only is it not offensive, it is required. Otherwise, why are you reading all these books? You're supposed to be thinking of these pastimes. So these are the positive triggers, and these are the positive restraints. Srila Prabhupada has written in the Nectar of Devotion in chapter 2 that whenever there is an order, then within it includes a prohibition. So whenever we have a positive instruction, which is to focus on Krishna, then within that includes all the negative instructions not to go anywhere else. But if you've experienced, and I certainly experienced, that still, nevertheless, our mind is always wandering. And this is what, Shukadeva Goswami was saying at the beginning, that the mind is very restless. And Arjuna has also said that the mind is difficult to control like the wind. So we have to keep bringing it back. So while we're bringing it back, we do that shortly and sharply. We don't get into an argument with the mind. So there are some common arguments that the mind gives when it's trying to get us to do something. And so one of those that people have studied is that we think that we're going to do something different tomorrow than we'll do today. So we may think that, okay, this one time is okay, I'll do something different, and I'll do. So for instance, an example might be that I have a program of exercise. I've decided that I'm going to do such and such program of exercise, each day, or, at certain times of the week. And then when the time comes, my mind doesn't feel like it. And then it comes up with some reasons. And then it says, well, I'll make up for it in the future. So this is an example of how we think that we're going to be different in the future than in the present. And psychologists and even economists have studied this technique. This sort of mental tendency that we think that our future self is different from our present self. So one thing that so sometimes there is actually an unusual circumstance. So for instance, we have heard that our dear friend, dear Lalita Prabhu, had an accident, a serious accident, and his way of life has certainly changed according to that accident from what it was before. So there can sometimes be a serious circumstance that requires us to change. But often, at least my mind, instead of talking about serious circumstances, is making excuses. So a way to check whether is this really an excuse or is it a really serious circumstance is we can say, okay, so when I think that I'm going to do things differently in the future, how often is this situation going to come up that I am saying now is an excuse? So if it's something that is going to come up, how is this different than, the other you know, if I think that I'm going to do something 52 weeks of the year, how is this different from the other 52 weeks? Or how is this different from the other 365 days? Or however often we think that we want to do this, is this circumstance different than all those other circumstances? And we should have a realistic idea that people often have a different idea of their future self, that my future self will be much better than my present self, and we should not think that. We should remember that the mind, as it's always going to be trying to trick us. So my future self is not that different from my present self. So it may be true that this one time won't make much difference, that, you know, my going through this exercise this one time, whether I do or not, it won't make a difference. But the fact is that there's nothing different about this time than the, you know, however many other times, than the next 12 times in the month. Then if I'm not going to do it this time, then I probably won't do it the next 11 times either. So if we want to establish a habit, then we need to, we can dissuade the mind by, or we can basically tell the mind that this, just very firmly, that this is a habit that we have decided with our intelligence to establish, and therefore we're going to continue it. So it looks like I'm coming to the end of my time. So I think there should be some time for questions. And first of all, I should offer my obeisances to all of you. And pray that you will help me to make friends with my mind.
Thank you very much, Mataji. So devotees, if anybody likes to have any questions, please go ahead.
Let's stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Mataji. Is this the presentation from Raghunath Goswami's book?
No, I actually didn't include his book.
Or is also a book from Urmila Mataji? I don't know, I'm just checking maybe.
So just the 4 keys were from her presentation about children, and so then I adapted them for the mind.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just made a comment there when I heard one comment is very interesting.
I'm sorry, let me just turn up the volume. Yes?
Yeah, there was a comment, I made it in the chat. So it was very interesting when I heard there was a seminar from similar topic from Chaitanya Chan Prabhu, Mind, M-I-N-D. I gave up abbreviation. So in fact, he gave a presentation voice also when he came. Interesting, I just was sharing there.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I haven't heard that particular one. I think I had heard from him about the discipline of this mental silence in one of his presentations about that Bhagavad Gita verse, chapter 17, verse 16. He talked about mental silence.
Thank you.
Looks like there is no questions. And thank you so much, very much, Mataji, for your wonderful time and wonderful presentation. And really appreciate that. And Hari would like to give some announcements so we can move on with that.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you, Mother Rukmini, for a very nice class. I really learned a lot. Let me share my screen and then hear the announcements for this week. Start broadcast. Can everybody see my screen? It should say Sunday Feast Announcements 8/16/2020.
Yes, Hari.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so these are the feast announcements. This week there are no festivals, no Vaishnav festivals in the Vaishnav calendar. There's Amavasya, which is coming, I think Wednesday or Tuesday or something like that. But so we have some more festivals. We finished 2. We finished 3 actually. So we have one more. The auspicious day of Sri Radhashtami is coming on Tuesday, August 25th. So not this Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. That's going to be a very special day. And then details about that festival and how it will be celebrated will be sent in email maybe this week. Yeah, and then so here is, and then so we're also preparing for Bhadra Purnima 2020, which comes on a Wednesday, September 2nd, on as 2020. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is Amala Purana, in the Canto 12, Chapter 13, Text 13, it states that if on the full moon day of the month of Bhadra, one places Srimad Bhagavatam on a golden throne and gives it as a gift, he will attain the supreme transcendental destination. So this week has been a really good week for our Bhadra Purnima campaign. We're just instead of doing it for the whole day, just one day, we've expanded the book distribution ministry has expanded the whole month. So we're kind of doing like a whole Bhadra campaign almost. So we are getting a lot of people who are interested in getting Bhagavatams and who want it on the day, and people who are answering for their friends. Just this week, someone contacted us from Cincinnati and then Athens, Ohio. Some devotees from Cleveland are trying to get one. So if you are interested in installing a Bhagavatam on, or if you like a Srimad Bhagavatam in general, or you want to give one to a friend as a gift, please contact me. My name is Hari at 614-592-0263. And yeah, and it's a very good day to give it, and Bhagavatam is so nice to have in the house. Krishna lunch for this week. We're going back to our original schedule, our original menu, and no Ekadasi this week. So it's the same. So I'll publish that probably this evening. So please pick up at 379 West 8th Avenue, which is our temple. To order, please call or text Nitai Chand, that's 740-972-7258 by 10 a.m. and pick up after 12:10. I can't stress enough that you really need to text or call by 10 if you would like a plate, because sometimes the cooks are getting a little bit a lot of people come, and there's not really any accurate way to know how much to cook for. If we cook for too much, then it's a waste of prasadam, and then there's a wastage. Not enough people go away hungry. So we want to be accurate in that. So please make an effort to call by 10 if you're planning to come. If you're planning to come and take the Krishna lunch. So Shravanam Saturdays, which is to be announced for next week. So we don't have a speaker. We have a speaker scheduled, but we're still getting the details ironed out. Next Sunday speaker is Mother Malti, Haribo, and so we would like to just say give a thank you. We had a wonderful Janmashtami festival and Srila Prabhupada's Appearance Day festival, and over 250 plates of prasadam were served in about an hour. I've heard that, I wasn't really at the temple in the evening, but I heard that prasadam pickup started at 7, and by 8 o'clock there were 250 plates gone, and there were hundreds and hundreds of laddus distributed. There were 2 Bhagavatams that and many other books that people got in their homes, and hundreds of people took darshan of Krishna in Gornitai and partook in chanting of the holy name at Goodale Park. And there was so much wonderful darshan, and there were so many people who were interested in Krishna consciousness, and it was a very wonderful festival, and we really like to thank everybody who helped out and who assisted in the festival in any way. It was just so sweet to see all the devotees again, being socially distanced and being safe about their health. Because we were running that from our side of the program, that at Goodale Park, when we were setting up, one person, we were just starting out the Harinam, and one person came up on his bike, and he was just riding on his bike, and I didn't know who he is. He had a lot of tattoos, and he was just riding by. And then he just, when he was writing, and we were saying, he was writing, he just screamed at us, Jaya Prabhupada. And then he just wrote off. We tried to give him a cookie, he didn't want it. He just wrote Jaya. And that's made during Hare special event to have it there. So we'd like to thank you all for your participation in that. Any other announcements from Ramtirtha Prabhu, Namin Krishna Prabhu, or any other announcements does anybody have?
Yes, Prabhu.
Who? Oh,
I
okay.
can't come before the video. I can't be visible. Yesterday was Vasanta Mataji's wonderful happy birthday.
Hare
Free
Krishna.
ball.
I want all devotees to pray for her, and as she reached the milestone and joined the club of Navin Krishna and Ramtirtha of 50s. So please pray for her, because usually we celebrate in the temple, but because of this COVID, we were personally not there. So yesterday was Vasanta Mataji's birthday.
Hare Krishna.
Free ball.
Any other announcements from any other devotees?
No, Hari. I think we are good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great Krishna conscious week, and we'll see you in the next Zoom call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.